The story begins with a 20-year-old boy named Will Hunting. He lives in a very poor neighborhood, but works at the world's most famous university, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It sounds great, but the reality is that Will doesn't study there. He just cleans the university's buildings. One day, while cleaning a corridor, he notices a very difficult math problem written on a board. The problem was written by Professor Gerald Lambeau, who had challenged the entire college that whoever solved it would have their name published in university books and would gain both fame and respect. Will looks at the problem intently, and his mind gets stuck on it. He thinks about the problem all day, even when he's with his friends at a bar. Suddenly, he leaves his friends and goes straight to his small, old house so he can sit up all night and solve the problem. He doesn't have a blackboard at home, so he writes the solution on the bathroom mirror, erasing mistakes and trying again. After several hours, he finally solves it. A few days later, when he goes to work, he writes the correct solution on the board while cleaning. When Professor Lambeau sees the solution written on the board, he's astonished. He can't believe that one of his students solved such a difficult problem so quickly. He becomes anxious to find out who this genius is. That same evening, Will is out with his friends. They run into some people, and one boy makes fun of a girl. Will recognizes the boy. It's the same person who used to bully him in his childhood. In a fit of rage, Will tells his friend to stop the car and, without thinking, gets out and attacks him directly. Will punches him, and a fight breaks out between the two groups. Soon, the police arrive. Will's friends try to pull him away to save him, but it's too late. The police arrest Will. The next morning, Professor Lambeau gives a lecture to his students. Everyone's eyes are on him because they all want to know who solved the difficult problem. But no one in the class gives an answer. Professor Lambeau, a little disappointed, says that if someone has solved the previous problem, he'll give them an even more difficult one. He reveals that it's the same problem he and his colleagues have been working on for the past 2 years, and now that same problem is written on the board. Meanwhile, Will leaves the police station and tells his friends that his court date is next week. In the evening, he goes to his job and again sees an easy problem on the board. He quickly starts to solve it, so no one will see him. Just then, Professor Lambeau comes out of his office and sees Will writing on the board. He angrily asks, "What are you doing here?" Will immediately apologizes and steps back. The professor thinks this boy is a mischief maker who's just writing on the board for no reason. He tries to grab him, but Will nimbly disappears. When the professor looks at the board again, he realizes the correct answer is written there. He's stunned. After work that evening, Will goes to a bar with his friends and tells him he's been fired from his job and won't be able to solve problems inside the university anymore. His friends ask why he was fired, and Will jokes, "Management just made some changes." The next day, Professor Lambeau decides he's going to find this mysterious genius. He goes directly to the cleaning staff's office and asks for the name of a boy who works there. However, the staff thinks the professor has come to complain about the cleaning, so they don't immediately give Will's name. A little while later, it's revealed that Will wasn't cleaning at MIT by his own will. It was community service given by the court. Now the day to hear his case has arrived. Professor Lambeau is also present in court. Everyone watches as Will argues his own case. He shows so much knowledge about law and society that everyone is amazed. However, he has many old cases against him, so the judge sends him to jail and sets a bail of $50,000. Sometime later, Professor Lambeau visits Will in jail. He tells him that the judge has allowed him to be released from jail, but with two conditions. First, Will must study with the professor every week, and second, he must meet with a psychological doctor every week to curb his anger and criminal habits. Will feels he doesn't need a psychologist, but to be free, he accepts the condition. After being released from jail, he begins studying with the professor and easily solves even the most difficult problems. The professor is very impressed by his ability. However, therapy isn't so easy. The professor brings in several different doctors, but none can handle Will. The first doctor gets scared because Will makes fun of a book he wrote. Will says he read his book in one night and that there's nothing special in it. Hearing this, the doctor gets angry and leaves the session. The second psychologist tries to handle Will in a different way. He tries to put him to sleep by hypnotizing him. But this method doesn't work either. Seeing this, Professor Lambeau almost gives up. Then he remembers his old college friend Sean McGuire, who is now a psychological doctor. Professor Lambeau goes to Sean's office, tells him about Will's case, and invites him to discuss it together at a restaurant. At first, Sean refuses because his schedule is very busy. But Professor Lambeau explains that Will is no ordinary boy, but a genius of a different level. He compares him to that famous mathematical scholar who made great discoveries without any formal education. Hearing this, Sean finally agrees to meet with Will. In the first session, Will, as always, tries to annoy the doctor with rudeness and jokes. He even makes fun of a painting Sean made, calling it completely useless. Sean doesn't get angry and remains calm. But when Will makes fun of his personal life and his wife, Sean erupts in fury. He says in a stern voice, "If you ever mention my wife's name again, I will destroy you." And with that, he ends the session. Later, when Professor Lambeau sees that Sean is upset, he tells him he can drop the case if he wants. But Sean says clearly that he will definitely meet with Will again next week. After the first session, Sean keeps thinking about what Will said, especially when he mentioned his wife. These memories make him feel lonely. Meanwhile, Will's life moves forward a little. He goes on a date with the girl he met at the bar, Skylar. Skylar tells him she inherited a lot of money from her father and is thinking of applying to Stanford University. They have a great evening together, and at the end, they kiss in a diner. Now comes the second therapy session. This time, Sean doesn't take Will to his office, but to a park bench. As soon as Will starts his usual teasing and taunting, Sean stops him. Sean says he's thought a lot about what Will said and now has something to say. He says that even though Will is very well read and has a sharp mind, he knows nothing about real life. He can learn about every artist in the world from books, but he's never left Boston to see their real works. He can recite books written on war, but has never seen a battlefield. He can recite love poems, but has never truly loved a woman or completely opened up to her. And most importantly, until Will talks about the pain in his heart himself, no one can understand the pain of being an orphan. Sean says all this can't be learned from books. Life itself teaches the real lessons. In the next session, Will remains silent the whole time. Sean sits there quietly because he knows Will is just testing him, and he turns out to be right. In the very next session, Will breaks the silence and tells Sean a dirty joke. After this, they start having light-hearted conversations. Will talks about his date. Sean asks if he'll see Skylar again. That's when Will admits the truth. He says maybe not because he doesn't want to break the perfect image of her that he has in his mind. But Sean explains that Will is actually afraid of the perfect image he's created of himself, not of the girl. In real relationships, you have to accept each other's flaws and habits. Sean tells the story of his wife, who recently passed away from cancer. He says he misses her small habits and tantrums the most. True love and closeness only happen when we accept a person with their flaws. For the first time, Will listens intently. On the other hand, Will goes to Skylar's dorm to meet her. Skylar is surprised because Will hadn't called her for a long time, but she agrees to go out. The next day, they go to a dog race and have a great time. Skylar asks Will where he grew up. Will hides the truth and jokingly says he has 12 older brothers. Skylar laughs and says it's a lie, but Will makes it more fun by swearing it's true. He even has to promise that he'll soon introduce Skylar to his family. After this, Skylar asks Will how someone knows if they found their true partner. This question stays in Will's mind, and he asks Sean the same thing the next day. Sean smiles and says he knew at first sight when he saw his wife. Then he tells a story. One time he got tickets to a very rare baseball game, but he skipped the game because he met a beautiful girl in a bar that same day. Sean says he has no regrets about missing that game even today. Skylar keeps insisting that Will introduce her to his real family, but Will still avoids telling the truth. So he decides to at least introduce her to his friends. Skylar easily blends in with their group. She laughs and jokes with everyone and drinks beer. But at the end of the night, something Chuck says spoils Will's mood. On the other hand, Professor Lambeau meets Sean at a diner and asks about Will's therapy. Lambeau doesn't really care about Will's past. He just wants to know what Will do next under his guidance. Sean says he won't pressure Will because Will has to decide what he wants in life. Hearing this, Lambeau gets angry and says he's already introduced Will to very important people. But they don't know that Will's friend Chuck went to meet those people instead of Will. There, Chuck demands money and ruins the whole deal with his bad behavior. Meanwhile, Will and Skylar have a romantic evening, and their relationship deepens. Skylar asks Will a direct question at her house. She says she has to go to California to study at Stanford and wants Will to come with her. But Will immediately refuses and starts making all sorts of excuses. Skylar explains that he's just stuck in his small world where he faces no challenges and is afraid of new things. Hearing this, Will gets furious. He thinks Skylar is just making fun of him and that he's just a pastime for her because he's poor. Skylar, surprised, asks why he's so tense about money. She cries and says that if she had to choose between her rich father's wealth and her father, she would always choose her father, not the money. Skylar clearly says that she's also scared, but at least she's honest with Will. Will argues again. Then Skylar remembers that Will repeatedly told her the false story about his 12 brothers. Now Will completely loses his temper and starts shouting. He says that Skylar would never want to know his real life because the truth is that he's an orphan and people were very cruel to him in his childhood. Skylar, with tears in her eyes, reassures him that she wants to know everything about him, no matter how painful it is. Finally, Skylar tells him what's in her heart. She loves him. But Will's heart is already closed, and he says in a cold voice, "I don't love you." After this, Will meets Professor Lambo. Lambo is angry because Will's behavior at the meeting with the business partners ruined everything. Will explodes in anger and says he's not even sure if he really wants this academic career anymore. Now Will and Professor Lambo's conversation becomes even more difficult because Will's sharp remarks belittle Lambo. Lambo says he at least expected a little gratitude from Will. They argue, and Will leaves in a rage. Sometime later, Will is called for a job at the National Security Agency, NSA, where he's promised a golden career, but Will flatly refuses. He says he doesn't want to ruin an ordinary person's life just for political games. After this, Will meets with Sean again. Sean asks why he turned down the NSA job. Will laughs and says, "I'm waiting for a better opportunity." Sean, who is his psychologist, asks Will if he has any friends with whom he can share his feelings or if he ever feels lonely. Instead of answering, Will starts listing the names of famous philosophers. Then Sean explains that real relationships can only be made with living people. Sean then asks what Will really wants if he's serious about his future. Will jokes that he has no problem being a bricklayer or a cowboy. Sean understands that Will is just joking and running away from his truth. In anger, Sean throws him out of his office. Will is shocked as to why he was kicked out. Then Sean says clearly, "Because you're not answering honestly. You're just hiding your real identity." While talking, Will asks, "You talk about your life partner, but where's your wife?" Sean calmly replies, "She's no longer in this world." Time passes and Will calls Skylar. But Skylar has stopped waiting for him because Will never makes a firm decision. Skylar says, "I love you" one last time, tells him take care, and then she leaves for California. On the other hand, Will starts working construction with his friend Chuck in Boston. Meanwhile, Professor Lambo says on the phone that Will isn't fulfilling his obligations. If he reports to the court that Will isn't attending his sessions, Will go back to jail, and this time his conscience will be clear. During a break at work, Chuck asks Will what he's going to do with his life. Will jokes that he doesn't want to be a rat in a lab solving math problems. He wants to stay in Boston and have fun with his friends. But this time, Chuck openly scolds Will. He says Will is wasting his talent. Chuck even admits that every day he wishes that one day Will would leave his house and build his real life. In the meantime, Lambo finds out that Will is also not going to therapy with Sean anymore. In anger, Lambo threatens Sean that he'll tell the judge the truth and accuses Sean of pushing Will back toward a life of crime. Sean tells Professor Lambo that he doesn't care if people laugh at him, but he can't ignore Will's feelings. Sean explains that Lambo has never been able to accept real love and has been lonely his whole life. But Lambo isn't willing to listen to him. He thinks Sean is jealous of his success. Hearing this, Sean is surprised and feels that Lambo is just arrogant. Sean explains that he only cares about Will's future and his true desires, while Lambo's pressure can make him fail. Then Lambo quietly leaves, leaving Will alone with Sean. Sean tells Will that his fight with Lambo isn't personal, but is related to old issues. Then Sean changes the subject and tells him that he has prepared a report for the judge about Will. Will asks him if he's had other patients like him. That's when Sean shares his personal life for the first time and says that his father was an alcoholic who used to beat him a lot. He tells Will that what happened to him wasn't his fault. At first, Will tries to brush it off with a joke, but then he suddenly breaks down and lets his real feelings out. Finally, everything becomes clear. His father was an alcoholic and used to beat him a lot in his childhood. Will comes to Sean for his last session and tells him that he's decided to join one of the companies suggested by Professor Lambo and that he's happy with this decision. Sean also says that he's thought about traveling the world a bit and gives Will his number as he leaves. In the evening, Will celebrates his birthday with his friends. His friends gift him a car that they built by putting together old parts. In the meantime, Professor Lambo comes to meet Sean. They apologize to each other and then go out for a drink together at a bar. On the other hand, as always, Chuck comes to pick up Will. But this time he sees that Will isn't at home. Seeing this, Chuck is very happy, just as he had always wished in his dreams. Will had left a note for Sean. Sean reads it and finds out that Will has quit the job and has gone to California to be with Skylar. In the note, Will writes the same line that Sean once said to his friends when he decided to skip the baseball game to meet his future wife. And the story ends beautifully in this way. This story teaches us that true victory in life doesn't come from degrees or jobs, but from finding true love and recognizing one's true purpose.